In the summer of 1967, a decorated American soldier named William Doyle cut off the ears of a Vietnamese farmer he had just killed and strung them on a necklace. He was not court-martialed. He was not reprimanded. He continued serving with his unit for months afterward. His commanding officers knew, the Army knew, and for the next 35 years the United States government made sure almost no one else did. Doyle was a member of Tiger Force, a 45-man long-range reconnaissance platoon attached to the 1st Battalion, 327th Infantry of the 101st Airborne Division. Tiger Force had been created in 1965 as an elite small unit designed to out-guerrilla the guerrilla, to move through the jungle in small groups, live off the land, and strike the Viet Cong on their own terms. By the spring of 1967, operating in the Song Ve Valley and Quang Ngai Province, Tiger Force had become something else entirely. What they became is one of the most carefully buried stories in American military history. The transformation did not happen overnight. It happened the way these things always happen, gradually, then completely. Tiger Force operated in areas where the distinction between civilian and combatant had been deliberately erased by American free-fire zone policies. In a free-fire zone, anyone present was presumed hostile. Anyone could be killed. The rules of engagement, already permissive, were interpreted by Tiger Force leadership in the field as effectively non-existent, and without accountability, without oversight, without anyone above them asking hard questions about body counts, the unit descended into systematic atrocity. The killings began with ambiguity and ended with deliberate murder. Soldiers testified later that the early incidents could be rationalized. A farmer who ran, a villager who couldn't explain his presence, a man who was in the wrong place. But by the summer of 1967, rationalization had been abandoned entirely. Tiger Force soldiers killed unarmed farmers in their fields. They killed elderly men and women who posed no conceivable threat. They killed children. Sam Maibara, one of the unit's most violent members, was documented by fellow soldiers as having killed at least a dozen unarmed civilians, including a baby, during the unit's 7-month rampage through Quang Ngai Province. Fellow soldiers witnessed it. Some participated, some objected and were threatened into silence. The scalping started sometime in mid-1967. Soldiers began taking ears, scalps, and other body parts as trophies. This was not unique to Vietnam, nor was it unique to Tiger Force, but within the unit it became normalized, even encouraged by some NCOs as a display of aggression and unit cohesion. Gustav Apsey, a soldier who later became a key witness in the Army's investigation, testified that he watched a sergeant cut the throat of a prisoner who had already surrendered. The prisoner was an elderly man. He was unarmed. He died in a rice paddy while Apsey watched and said nothing, because saying something meant becoming a target yourself. The specific incident that anchored the subsequent investigation occurred in the village of Tuy An. Tiger Force soldiers moved through the village and killed an unknown number of unarmed civilians. Witnesses, both American soldiers and Vietnamese survivors, later described systematic execution-style killings of people who had made no hostile act and posed no threat. The exact death toll from Tuy An alone was never established, because the Army's investigation, when it finally came, was not designed to establish truth. It was designed to manage exposure. By August 1967, Tiger Force had been in the field continuously for 7 months. The unit's commanding officer, Lieutenant James Hawkins, had rotated out. The soldiers who remained were operating in a moral vacuum that the Army's command structure had created and then declined to examine. When Tiger Force was finally pulled from the field in November 1967, the men rotated back to their units. Some received decorations, none were investigated. The Army's official record showed Tiger Force as a successful long-range reconnaissance unit with an impressive body count. The nature of those bodies was not recorded. The investigation that should have happened in 1967 did not begin until 1971, and only then because a soldier named Gerald Bruner, troubled by what he had witnessed, made a formal complaint through Army channels. The Criminal Investigation Division opened a case. What followed was 4.5 years of investigation that interviewed 137 witnesses, compiled thousands of pages of testimony, and documented an estimated 81 civilian murders attributable to Tiger Force members. 81 confirmed civilian murders. The investigators recommended prosecution of 18 soldiers. The Army declined to prosecute any of them. The reasons given were procedural. Witnesses had scattered, evidence had degraded, the statute of limitations had complicated certain charges, the soldiers had left active duty. These were real obstacles, but they were not insurmountable obstacles, and the Army's decision-makers knew the difference. The decision not to prosecute was made at the highest levels of the Army's Judge Advocate General Corps, reviewed by the Secretary of the Army, and signed off on in 1975. The files were then classified and buried in military archives. No public announcement was made, no press release, no acknowledgement that an investigation had occurred, let alone what it had found. The men of Tiger Force went home. William Doyle, who had worn ears on a necklace, became a corrections officer. Sam Ibarra, documented as having killed unarmed civilians including a child, drifted through the civilian world, in and out of trouble, dying in 1982 without ever facing military justice. Others built careers, raised families, and lived with what they knew. Some were destroyed by it. Sergeant Roy Bumgarner, one of the unit's most decorated soldiers and one of its most violent, was killed in 1968 in a separate incident. Several Tiger Force veterans developed severe PTSD and alcoholism. A few, in later years, tried to talk about what happened and found that no one in authority wanted to listen. The story might have stayed buried forever if not for two reporters at the Toledo Blade. Michael Sallah and Mitch Weiss spent 2 years tracking down Tiger Force veterans, Vietnamese survivors, and the classified Army investigation files, which they obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests. Their investigation, published in October 2003 as a 4-part series titled Buried Secrets, Brutal Truths, documented the killings in meticulous, sourced detail. They named names, they quoted testimony, they described specific incidents with the precision that the Army's own investigators had assembled and then locked away. The response from the Army was instructive. A spokesman confirmed that an investigation had taken place and that no prosecutions had resulted. No apology was offered. No explanation was given for why the investigation's findings had been classified for nearly 3 decades. The Department of Defense declined to reopen the case. In April 2004, Michael Sallah and Mitch Weiss received the Pulitzer Prize for investigative reporting. The documentation was airtight, the witnesses were real, the Army's own files confirmed the core findings. Nothing happened. No prosecutions were reopened, no congressional investigation was launched. No official apology was issued to the Vietnamese communities of Quang Ngai Province where the killings occurred. The soldiers named in the series were protected by the statute of limitations, by their age, and by the institutional inertia of a military and government that had made a decision in 1975 and saw no reason to revisit it. The Vietnamese survivors, the families of the estimated 81 civilians documented as murdered by Tiger Force, received nothing. The Tiger Force story sits in uncomfortable proximity to My Lai, the 1968 massacre that became the Vietnam War's defining atrocity. My Lai entered the public record because a soldier named Ron Ridenhour sent letters to Congress, because investigative journalist Seymour Hersh broke the story, because photographs existed that could not be suppressed. Lieutenant William Calley was court-martialed and convicted, though President Nixon commuted his sentence and he served 3.5 years under house arrest before being paroled. My Lai became the story America told itself about Vietnam atrocities. A contained story, with a villain, with a verdict, with an ending. Tiger Force had none of those things. It had 137 witnesses, 18 recommended prosecutions, and a decision to do nothing. It had a Pulitzer Prize and a government that shrugged. It had 81 documented civilian deaths, and no one held accountable for any of them. If My Lai was the atrocity America processed, Tiger Force is the one America chose not to. The distinction matters. My Lai could be explained, however inadequately, as a breakdown, an aberration, a unit that snapped under pressure at a specific moment. Tiger Force was 7 months. It was systematic. It was known by the chain of command and not stopped. It was investigated by the Army's own investigators, found to involve 81 murders, recommended for prosecution, and then buried. That is not a breakdown. That is a policy. The last Tiger Force veteran known to have spoken publicly about the events died before any legal accountability became possible. The Vietnamese survivors of Quang Ngai Province are elderly now. The villages where the killings occurred have been rebuilt. The rice paddies where farmers were shot are productive again. The people who remember have told their stories to their children and grandchildren, and those stories have not gone away simply because the American government declined to acknowledge them. What happened in the Songve Valley in 1967 was real. The Army's own files say so. 81 names, 137 witnesses, 4.5 years of investigation, 18 recommended prosecutions, and then a decision, made in quiet rooms by men in suits, that none of it would go further. That decision has never been reversed. The files are no longer classified, the reporting has been confirmed, and the men responsible died without answering for what they did. Some stories don't have endings, they just stop. If you want to understand more about how the Vietnam War was really fought and who was held accountable, there is a video on screen right now that goes deeper. Subscribe. These are the stories that don't go away just because someone decided they should.